Samjanamatram Prasutam iva vishvata Prasuptam iva vishvata Ahameva samevagre Nanyat kinchataram vahi Samjanamatram avyaktam Prasutam iva vishvata. Someone repeat. Ahameva samevagre Nanyat kinchataram vahi Samjana Prasutam iva vishvata Ahameva samevagre Nanyat kinchataram vahi Samjanamatram avyaktam Prasuptam iva vishvata. Ahameva samevagre Nanyat kinchantaram vahi Samjanamatram avyaktam Prasuptam iva vishvatam. Vaishnavis. Ahameva samevagre Nanyat kinchantaram vahi Samjanamatram avyaktam Prasuptam iva vishvata. Ahameva samevagre Nanyat kinchataram vahi Samjanamatram avyaktam Samjana. Aham, I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Eva, only. Asam, was. Eva, certainly. Agre, in the beginning, before the creation. Na, not. Anyat, other. Kincha, anything. Antaram, besides me. Bahi, external. Since the cosmic manifestation is external to the spiritual world existed when there was no material world. Prabhupada has this in parenthesis. Samjana matram, only the consciousness of the living entities. Avyaktam, unmanifested. Prasuptam, sleeping. Eva, like. Vishvata, all over. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Before the creation of the cosmic manifestation, I alone existed with my specific spiritual potencies. Consciousness was then unmanifested, just as one's consciousness is unmanifested during the time of sleep. So we can all repeat together. Before the creation of the cosmic manifestation, I alone existed with my specific spiritual potencies. Consciousness was then unmanifested, just as one's consciousness is unmanifested during the time of sleep. Purport by His Divine Grace. So I'm very lucky. It's a very long purport. Generally, the Vyasa-san is meant for educated men, men of knowledge, men of some realization. But somehow today they've made the exception. So I beg of all of you that in your heart you can allow me to say something, maybe even only one little thing that may inspire you and take more seriously to Krishna consciousness, because there are many of you sitting in front of me that are far more qualified to speak than I am. So we'll read Srila Prabhupada's purport. The word aham indicates a person. As explained in the Vedas, nityo nityananam chaitananas chaitananam. The Lord is the supreme eternal among innumerable eternals, and the supreme living being among the innumerable living beings. The Lord is a person who has impersonal features. As stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam 1-11, Vedanti tattvas vidas tattvam yaj jnanamavayam Brahmite paramatmite bhagavan iti sabjate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. Consideration of the Paramatma and impersonal Brahman arose after the creation. Before the creation, only the Supreme Personality of Godhead existed. As firmly declared in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord can be understood only by Bhakti Yoga. The ultimate cause, the supreme cause of creation, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who can be understood only by Bhakti Yoga. He cannot be understood by speculative philosophical research or by meditation, since all such processes came into existence after the material creation. The impersonal and localized conceptions of the Supreme Lord are more or less materially contaminated. The real spiritual process, therefore, is Bhakti Yoga. As the Lord says, Bhaktimam abhijalanti. Only by devotional service can I be understood. Before the creation, the Lord existed as a person, as indicated here by the word aham. When Prajapati Daksha saw him as a person who was beautifully dressed and ornamented, he actually experienced the meaning of this word aham through devotional service. Each person is eternal, because the Lord says that he existed as a person before the creation, agre, and who will exist after the annihilation. The Lord is a person eternally. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur therefore quotes these verses from Srimad Bhagavatam. Nanchantar na baharjasya na purvam na pichaparam purvaparam bahischantar jagatoja jagatchacha tammatya vamajam avyaktam marchalingam adoksajam gopi kula kaledhamna babandham prakritam yatha. The personality of Godhead appeared in Vrindavan as the son of Mother Yasoda, who bound the Lord with rope just as an ordinary mother binds a material child. There is actually no divisions of external and internal for the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sat Chit Ananda Vigraha. But when he appears in his own form, the unintelligent people think him as an ordinary person. Isn't it? Avijananti mamudha manusim tanum asritam. Although he comes in his own body, which never changes, mudhas, the unintelligent, think that the impersonal Brahman has assumed a material body to come in the form of a person. Ordinary living beings assume material bodies, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead does not. Since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Consciousness, it is stated herein that samgyana matram, the original consciousness, Krishna consciousness, was unmanifest before the creation. Although the consciousness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the origin of everything. The Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, 12, text 12, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. Thus the Lord's person in the absolute truth in the past is the absolute truth in the past, present, and future. In this regard, Madhvacharya quotes two verses from the Matsya Purana. Nano varno haristrako bahu sirsha bujharupat ashilayeta danyatu shukshma rupam sriyambhina ashukta sukta evacha militaksho bhavadhari anyatranna dharatad vishnu srischalivena kachyate shukshmatvena harostallal linamanyat apishyate. After the annihilation of everything, the Lord, because of his Satchidananda Vigraha, remains in his original form. But since the other living entities have material bodies, the matter merges into matter, and the subtle form of the spirit soul remains within the body of the Lord. The Lord does not sleep, but the ordinary living entities remain asleep until the creation. An unintelligent person thinks that the opulence of the Supreme Lord is non-existent after the annihilation, but that is not a fact. The opulence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead remains as it is in the spiritual world. Only in the material world is everything dissolved. Brahma Lina, merging into the Supreme Brahman, is not actually Lina or annihilation, for the subtle form remaining in Brahman effulgence will return to the material world after the material creation and again assume a material body. That's worth repeating. The subtle form remaining in the Brahman effulgence will return to the material world after the material creation and again assume a material form. This is described as bhutva bhutva praliyate. When the material body is annihilated, the spirit soul remains in a subtle form, which later assumes another material body. This is true for the conditioned souls, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead remains eternally in his original consciousness and spiritual body. Om Ajnanaatimirandasya Jnana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manubhistam Stapitam Dena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadhamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sriyata Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Zanvitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamscha Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So Srila Prabhupada gives a very long purport. And in the purport, if any of you noticed, he says over and over again, the Supreme Personality of Godhead has always been and will always remain. And he makes this point several times. When Srila Prabhupada came to America, he didn't come so much to establish Indian culture. He didn't come with the primary goal of building big temples or importing certain customs. He came for one reason, and that reason was to make sure that we understood that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is a person. Up till that point, so many translations of Bhagavad Gita had been given. So many people had studied the quote-unquote, studied the Vedas, and what they've come away with is this impersonal concept that how can Krishna take a personal form? You know, this is beneath him. But the Lord comes, as stated in Bhagavad Gita, he comes when irreligiosity is growing. He comes to reestablish religion, and he comes to inspire his devotees. So Srila Prabhupada, he traveled quite a long way and went through so many hardships to come and make this point. So before the material creation, it says here the material creation is within the Lord. But of course the Lord is never in contact with the material energy. Material energy never touches the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And also, Srila Prabhupada, early on in this purport, he makes the point that only these things can be understood through the process of devotional service. This is a pretty heady purport. There's so much information here. I'm reading and I'm thinking, I don't fully get it, so what can I add to this? But a few points that Prabhupada makes very clearly. Krishna is a person. Very important. And the only way that we can understand Krishna in his personal form is by worshiping, bowing down, offering prayers, by rendering the 9 processes of devotional service constantly, consistently, and gradually we'll begin to believe that, oh, Krishna's a person. And just like this morning, I'm thinking, Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. I'm looking at Krishna, and I'm thinking, how beautiful the form of the Lord is. How nicely decorated, how beautiful Radha Madhava are appearing to us. And they're appearing to us for our benefit. They're on the altar for our benefit, so that we can look upon them and understand that the form, that Krishna is unlimited. He has so many forms, so many expansions. So everything is Krishna. It's stated that there are more living entities in this material world than there are atoms. So who can understand these things? These are very lofty ideas. But Prabhupada somehow, he very clearly explains that before the Supreme Personality of Godhead, before the material energy, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is existing. At the end of this material creation, the annihilation's coming, and the living entities are then taken into the impersonal Brahman, as if they're asleep. So this is a long, long slumber. But if one hasn't come to the point where he accepts that Krishna is a person, then again he comes back and takes birth in this material world. This is a guarantee. Prabhupada makes this very clear. So the Lord is the source of everything, both eternal and temporary. And he also mentions there are innumerable eternals, and the Supreme Living Being is among the innumerable living beings. So there was one point here, if you'll give me a second. Consideration of the Paramatma and impersonal Brahman arose after the creation. Before the creation, only the Supreme Personality of Godhead existed. So the Lord expands himself, coming as Vishnu is lying on the causal ocean. From that, Lord, the navel is the stem of the lotus flower is coming, and Lord Brahma appears, and he's meditating what to do. And then from Lord Brahma come all the other living entities. And we come here to perform our little pastime for some brief time, and then we're gone. So I was thinking that even when Prabhupada was in India, before he came to America, he would go, particularly I was thinking about this time, there was a gathering of big Mayavadis, very educated, high-ranking Brahmins, and Srila Prabhupada and the devotees were invited to this gathering. So Prabhupada decided to attend, and they went to this gathering, and everyone was speaking, and Prabhupada was sitting patiently, but everyone was speaking that Krishna is the all-pervading aspect, and actually the form of Krishna is simply an analogy to give someone with material body and material senses an understanding that Krishna is the supreme, because we can't understand. So Prabhupada's listening, and devotees are listening. So it finally comes time for Srila Prabhupada to speak. And Prabhupada sits back and says, "Begin the kirtan." So the devotees do this kirtan, and suddenly these impersonalists, they're up and they're chanting, and the audience is up, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. And Prabhupada's sitting and he's listening, and the devotees do this wonderful kirtan. And at the end they sit, and Prabhupada says, "I think that speaks for itself." So there was no need to say anything. What can be said to these people who have this idea that Krishna's the energy and the form is simply for lesser intelligent people to try and understand how Krishna is unlimited? So Prabhupada didn't even speak. He wasn't even going to dignify their comments with a response. His response was the holy name. And why is that? Because by chanting the holy name, our heart becomes purified. When our heart becomes purified, then we fully can see the form of the Lord dancing. Of course, Srila Prabhupada could see this. We couldn't, but we took his word. He said, if you continue to do this, the Lord will reveal himself in the form of a person. So, very quickly, are there any reflections? Can someone add something? Or is something coming up in anyone's mind that they'd like to speak? Please. Do we have a microphone? Well, everyone should hear.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. I'm not very sure about it, but there are some descriptions of various kinds of muktis, and there are descriptions of various kinds of muktis, mokshas, and even after death, during the Antim Samskar ceremony, it's requested to grant all those 7 kinds of muktis or whatever, and one of the muktis is the muktis in the impersonal. So there is a mention probably of mukti or moksha with the impersonal, the impersonal aspect. So you said that Prabhupada said that one who doesn't accept the personal form has to come back.
Yes.
So if there's a mukti mentioned in scriptures, how is it essential that he has to come back?
Well, basically Srila Prabhupada is very clear here. He's saying that just like we can for some time become part of this we can become part of the impersonal Brahman. So again, when the living entities are coming, perhaps there's another opportunity to again take up devotional service to complete whatever part of that mukti or moksha that the living entity may have achieved previously. But this is a big risk. This is a big risk because we never know what type of body we're coming back as. Millions, so many millions and millions of lifetimes. So Srila Prabhupada's saying, and we have to accept that this is unsuitable for us. Our goal is Goloka Vrindavan. Our goal is to want to dance with Krishna, want to sing with Krishna, want to serve Krishna, want to take care of Krishna like a child. Just like he's mentioning here that the Supreme Personality of Godhead appeared in Vrindavan as the son of Mother Yasoda, who bound the Lord with a rope, just as an ordinary mother binds a material child. So the Lord is kind. He's offering this opportunity for us to become a friend, to become a servant, to become a parent, and so many things. But most important, we have to accept that the Lord is a person, and in his personal form is contained unlimited potencies. So when we see Radha Madhava, we have to understand that in that particular form, Radha Madhava, everything is contained. All material universes, all spiritual universes, all knowledge, all beauty, all fame, all wealth, all renunciation, all contained in the form of Radha Madhava. How can we understand? Only by chanting this Harinam in the association of devotees who are more advanced, who are more elevated, who can share with us their realizations. Any other reflections?
Prabhuji, I have comments over these queries that when the living being get liberation and emerges into Brahma effulgence, still his personal existence is there. And as a spirit soul, he is supremely active. And there Brahma effulgence, there is no service. So because the living being has not taken shelter of Krishna's lotus feet, or he is not doing any devotional service there, so he has to come back, because as a spirit soul he can't be inactive. So that's the reason that living being has to come back to material form.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you. He said that basically because there's no activity in the Brahman effulgence, there is no action, that this is the reason why the living entity must come back. Because by nature we're active. There's no service in the impersonal effulgence. Did I understand that correctly? So this is a good point. It's interesting. I'm not sure if someone was giving a lecture where they said each one of these verses, was it Bhaktisiddhanta who said each verse we can lecture on for 1 month. So two things. I was really happy that Srila Prabhupada had such a long purport so that you didn't all have to be bored and tortured by listening to my meager explanation. But also how much information is contained in one single purport. It's actually extraordinary. Yes, Prabhu. Can someone hand Rajendra the mic, please?
Priya.
Thank you.
Class. In the purport, Prabhupada said a couple of things that are really head scratchers on the surface. He said, consideration of the Paramatma. This is in the beginning of the purport.
Yes.
After Vedanti Tattva Vidas. Said, consideration of the Paramatma and impersonal Brahman arose after the creation. Before the creation, only the Supreme Personality of Godhead existed. And then later on, he said, after Avajananti Mamudha Tanamashu, he said, ordinary living beings assume material bodies, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead does not. Since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Consciousness, it's stated herein that Samgyana Matram, the original consciousness, Krishna consciousness, was unmanifested before the creation, although the consciousness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the origin of everything. So the first point I made, read was that before the creation, Brahman and Paramatma did not exist, and then the second one that before the creation that Krishna consciousness did not exist. So I think for a proper understanding, we'd have to say this is definitely speaking from the perspective of the living entity in the material world. Because Krishna is always Krishna conscious and he's existing, and Brahman is always existing, and Paramatma may only manifest during the creation, but he's eternal too.
This is a very good point. I hope you could all hear clearly what Rajendra Nandana Prabhu just said, because when I read this purport, I noticed this and I thought, I'm just not smart enough to understand. So I came to the conclusion, the same conclusion, that Srila Prabhupada here is trying to differentiate. He's making a few points very important. Krishna is a person. Krishna existed prior to the material creation and will exist eternally afterwards. Paramatma, as Rajendranandana just said, that Paramatma, an impersonal Brahman, arose after the creation. Before the creation, only the Supreme Personality of Godhead existed. So, in some sense, this is how deep Krishna consciousness is. It reminds me of Lord Brahma going down the stem of the lotus flower. He's going and going and going and going and not getting anywhere. So these studies, the depth of the understanding of these concepts that Srila Prabhupada is putting forward to us are so heavy and so layered, so many layers of understanding, that it can take lifetimes, which is why Srila Prabhupada didn't ask us, he didn't say to us first, here, you sit down and study these scriptures, and when you understand these scriptures fully, then you chant the holy name, and you'll understand the value of this chanting. No, he came, he simply said, chant the Hare Krishna mantra, and gradually all of these things will become revealed. But it's interesting because I was a bit concerned when I read the purport, how will I explain this? How can I understand this? So by Rajendranandana's chiming in, which I'm really happy he did, he's given a nice explanation that Srila Prabhupada wants us to understand that Krishna is there, the material energy is coming, the material energy is going, Krishna is remaining the same. He's remaining completely aloof, completely transcendental from the material energy. So this is going on since time immemorial. The creation is coming, living entities are coming, they're acting out so many different dramas, so many plays, like a dream. Devotee told me the other day, everything that we can think of, past, present, and future, is simply but a dream. Why is that? Because all of this will end, and no one will remember Prahlad Priya Das, or Prahlad Priya Das's little minuscule life, what his activities were. Millions of living entities, millions of activities. Our duty, our goal is to simply never forget that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that we are by nature parts and parcel. And as parts and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, our business is to render service to the personal form of the Lord. And by Srila Prabhupada's mercy, I remember how happy Srila Prabhupada was when the first Jagannath deity came. He was so pleased. I remember he said, they will not let us see Jagannath in Jagannath Puri, so we will make our own Jagannath. And in this way, he's having the deity carved and giving us some form to meditate upon. Otherwise, can you imagine? Is it imaginable for anyone here meditating on the void? That void will be filled with, oh, I have some bread, but I don't know if I got butter. So many things. The mind is just, like the wind. It's uncontrollable. So we can't really, I can't even understand the idea of meditating on the void. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add? Please, please.
One other really, on the surface, a head scratcher for me. The opulence of the last paragraph, right before Madhvacharya's verses he quoted. The opulence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead remains as it is in the spiritual world. Only in the material world is everything dissolved. Brahma Lina, merging to the Supreme Brahman, is not actual Lina or annihilation, for the subtle form remaining in the Brahman effulgence will return to the material world after the creation and again assume a material form. So in verses that Madhvacharya quoted just a little bit earlier. He said, after annihilation of everything, the Supreme Lord, because of his Satchidananda Vigraha, remains in his original form, but since the other living entities have material bodies, the matter merges into matter, and the subtle form of the spirit soul remains within the body of the Lord. The Lord does not sleep, but the ordinary living entities remain asleep until the next creation. So the last paragraph, you might think that after the annihilation that all the living entities go into Brahman, because he's talking about living entities going into Brahman, but at some point they will come back into the creation. But the verse quoted is the understanding that's given everywhere else, that when the Lord breathes in Mahavishnu, that all the living entities go into the body of the Lord. We're not going into Brahman unless you're equating the body of the Mahavishnu as Brahman. So you have to understand that reference to going to the Brahman and coming back is, I think, what the first Prabhu was saying. You may get Suyuja Mukti, but your desire will at some point kick in and you come back to the material creation. So I just thought I'd make mention of that. There were several in this purport that were really like, wow, on the surface it just sounds like one thing, but there's a little bit more explanation.
Thank you. I'm so grateful. This is what I was hoping for somebody to give a little clarity, because these are very, very complicated concepts. Of course, on one level they're very complicated, on another level very simple. Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhu, please.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, we can hear you.
Prabhupada had said many, many times that the deities are alive. They are not stone. And so for 37 years in Vrindavan, I can vouch for that. And a little incident happened here in Mayapur when Radha Madhava first came. They weren't painted. There were no eyes. So I was the person to put in the eyes. And when I did that, I could see there was a presence, a given a little vision of the Mayapur city. And then the painting I did, Bhaktivinoda looking across the Jalangi in one of the first books we put out here in Mayapur. That picture's there, and you see in the distance the city, and it's here. So the whole city is right there in Radha Madhava's grasp. And so we're just little instruments in manifesting this whole thing. And right now, as the work goes on in the TOVP, the presence of the Lord and Srila Prabhupada's energy is like so powerful and so much present. So we're so fortunate to be here at this time when this is manifesting. And when it does finally manifest, it will be definitely a big change in the world. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
So it's interesting, Bhaktisiddhanta, I'm glad he mentioned this, because when I became a devotee, or aspired to become a devotee back in 1975, Srila Prabhupada had so many plans, and he would send us out to distribute, and we'd collect, and he's going to build a temple in Vrindavan, and I believe he said Bombay was his office, Vrindavan was the home, and Mayapur, yes. So this was very, very difficult, I believe, for any of us to imagine. Now, take yourself back 40 years, 45 years. Srila Prabhupada is meditating 50 years, meditating, I'll go to America and I'll make some devotees. Inconceivable, inconceivable. Never having come to America, such a low level of pickings. You know, it's like picking through the garbage to find one morsel that might be edible. So many struggles, so many difficulties. I think what's important for all of us to remember, we're here in Mayapur. We're surrounded by hundreds and thousands of devotees who are blissfully carrying on with their service, hopefully blissfully, carrying on with their service, chanting, hearing, associating, taking prasadam, so many nice things. But none of this would have been possible without the sacrifice that our Guru Maharaj made in making this journey. And that wasn't the beginning. The journey on the Jaladuta was the beginning that we see. But so many sacrifices here in India, traveling from door to door, not taking meals, so he could save enough money to buy some paper so that he could print one more edition of Back to Godhead. You know, sometimes not eating. And other associates or devotees would say, Swamiji, have you eaten today? No, not so important. And they would make sure that they fed him. Then coming, taking the journey. Then coming and finding some devotees who could take up this process. I know I speak for myself. Sometimes they see, oh, you're Srila Prabhupada disciple. Oh, Haribol, some special respect. As far as my particular situation, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And when Srila Prabhupada took this elevated seat, and I was sitting, and he was expressing his gratitude, his thanks at the Rath Yatra in 1975 to all the devotees who had worked so hard to make this festival so big and beautiful, and his eyes welled up with tears. And his voice choked, and he said, so I want to thank these boys and girls for working so hard to help me to achieve the mission that my spiritual master. There's really no credit to myself, that I'm simply following the order of my spiritual master. So he was so humble, but he had worked so hard. And now here, I never imagined, never one moment did I imagine to see this Mayapur community, this city of Mayapur, manifest in my lifetime. And every time I come here, I want to faint. The feeling I get when I'm out of the car and I'm looking up, I want to faint. It's almost dreamlike. I'm having trouble realizing that. So maybe this is a good way for us to sum up this purport. Krishna is a person. The temple is the manifestation of the person, Srila Prabhupada. This is simply one of his many manifestations. This big, magnificent temple that will visually describe the universe, will visually describe the planets, will visually and audibly explain the great devotees who've participated in these eternal leelas of the Lord. We are the most fortunate. Never take this for granted. None of us. Never take for granted when we walk past this building, oh, so nice, the temple's being built, how nice. It is an extraordinary, superhuman achievement that Srila Prabhupada managed to find the devotees, that those devotees managed to find other devotees, that those devotees found people to invest, to take up this chanting, this hearing, and somehow or other give some minute contribution to this project that Bhaktivinoda Thakur envisioned so many years ago, and that Bhaktisiddhanta predicted, and that Srila Prabhupada manifest. This is an extraordinary time in Krishna consciousness. It will be looked back upon hundreds of years from now as a miracle. It was a miracle that they built this temple. It was a miracle. How did it happen? How did it happen? Who were some of those wonderful souls that gave assistance and that gave their life to fulfill the dream of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, and our beloved Guru, Srila Prabhupada? How fortunate are we? Let us never forget the great fortune. Let us never take it for granted. And never think that your service is not important. It always reminds me of the story, Ramayan, where Hanuman comes to the bank of the shore of the ocean, and the spider's kicking in one grain of sand. And he chastises, away, we have a bridge to build. And Lord Ram stops him and says, no. He is doing his service according to his capacity. He's giving full service, just like you are. So sometimes we may get this feeling, what am I doing? I'm not, you know, my service is so insignificant. If you serve another Prabhu prasadam, if you offer your respects to another Prabhu, if you serve in any capacity, on any level, to any Vaishnav devotee of the Lord, that service is accepted by the spiritual master. And that service is accepted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai. So we'll end here. We've had some nice reflections. And unless anyone has anything very specific they want to add, please, Prabhu, go ahead.
Just a little synopsis on what's going to happen at TOVP. I think it'd be very entertaining to
listen carefully, everyone.
Okay. So when a pilgrim comes into the building after seeing the deities, he takes the escalator. Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, well, Srila Prabhupada, we could get lots of money. Just charge a couple rupees and they get on that escalator. There's nothing like that in India at that time. And so then they come into the first area, which is like Vaikuntha, and it's Vrindavan. And so you're going to have a little explanation from Sanatana Goswami about the book, Priya Bhagavatamrita. And so on 3 levels. The first level is the earthly pastimes. When Gopakumar goes to Vrindavan, meets his guru, who is actually Krishna, then ultimately he goes on to be king of Puri, king of the earth. Then he goes up to Swarga, next level. And in Swarga he gets to be Indra, and he gets to be Brahma. He meets Lord Ramachandra, and ultimately he progresses to the 3rd level, which is Krishna Lila. And so the whole thing that happens on the 3rd level, there's going to be little electric cars that take you around on the upper 2 levels. And so those that can't walk and can't really function very well, you get a guided tour on an electric car. Then people walking, you get the synopsis of the whole spiritual world from top to bottom. And then there's hopefully some areas where we can shoot by visual projection. You know, Gopakumar from, meeting his guru to boom, he's in the spiritual world. And he meets Krishna finally. And so when that happens, he faints, Krishna faints, and the whole spiritual world shuts down when Krishna closes his eyes. And so Balaram came along and woke them both up. And so then ultimately Krishna Lila starts. And the same thing happens in Krishna Lila, it happens here. All these demons come, Kamsa comes, and it happens over and over again. It's the road show in the spiritual world, which unless you read the book, you don't know. Like when Krishna is taken away from Vrindavan, and Kurik takes him, and he forgets that he did it. He comes back and takes him again. So it's a whole story going on at the road show. And so it's so entertaining. But when you take the tour, when you go from top to bottom, you're going to shave up and join the movement. And go back home, back to God. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Is there anything else before we're running a little late here? Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.